End of the beginning, Chapter 1. Kopik glanced up from his writing. He was currently on a sand dune with Turaga Dume and a Lematoran named Vikan. The group was standing near a large fragment of the Motunui robot that had been possessed by Makuta. Turaga Dume had requested that the chronicler accompany him to record the recent events, and the Toa and other Turaga had agreed. Dume walked over to a large gap in the robot and said, "This is where the Dark Hunters emerged. See, this is the mark of the Shadowed One." He indicated towards a crude squiggle that resembled the Matoran letter S with an extra ring around it. Kopik noted the symbol, and scribbled down a replica of it on the tablet, and watched as the Turaga stepped through the hole to get a better look around. Suddenly, before the two Matorans' eyes, a shadowy portal opened, and a figure clad in red and black armor stepped out. He was clearly a Ta Matoran. Dume smiled and said, "Ah, another one of my villagers. Come with us, friend, you are safe now." The Ta Matoran flashed an evil grin and unsheathed his sword. Then he said, "Too bad you can't say the same, old fool." Kopik tried to shout a warning, but it was already too late. The Matoran of Fire twirled his sword in the air for a moment, then brought it down, splitting Dume's mask. A second blow finished off the confused and helpless Turaga. Vikan's eyes widened as he shouted, "I know you! You were in Kardanui with Makuta Krika and Makuta Gorast!" The Ta Matoran nodded and said, "Then my title precedes me." He turned to Kopik and said, "As for you, Ko-Matoran, since you obviously don't know me, I will tell you who I am." Before Kopik could do anything, Vikan had been slain by the Ta Matoran. He loomed over the chronicler, twirling his blade once again, and finished, "My name is Death, but my friends, if I had any, would call me Voltraz." Kopik held up his hands to his face as the blade came down. Malum tunneled up from the sandy terrain, flanked by 3 battered and beaten Voroks. The 4 of them were the only survivors of the barren sand tribe. Malum had attacked a large group of Glatorian of both Tessara and Iconox, but when he was about to defeat them, out of nowhere had come 60 wolves made of iron from the hillside. He had barely escaped, along with the 3 others, as the 50 other members of the tribe were annihilated by the wolves. He glanced back and watched as one of the Voroks fell to the ground, dead from exhaustion and blood loss. Malum sat down on the ground. It was time for a rest. He could have gone on, but he knew the Voroks couldn't, and would die before they stopped following him. He spotted a red dune snake slithering nearby, and he roasted it with a blast from his claw. The 3 of them ate in silence, crunching and swallowing even the teeth, only throwing out the single pair of fangs at the center of its mouth. Malum tossed the 2 teeth into the sand, and he jumped when he heard a voice say, "Why throw these away? They are quite useful." Half a second after the words had been spoken, Malum hurled a ball of flame in the direction that the voice had come from. The former Glatorian watched in shock as another warrior, clad in tan and brown armor, dodged the ball of flame and said, "Hold your fire, friend. I am not an enemy." Malum stared in shock at who stood before him. It was a Voroks. A Kamu flopped down on the sandy slope at the bottom of a sand dune. A week ago, Turaga Dume, the chronicler, and 1 more Matoran had been mysteriously found dead near the Makuta robot. The other Turaga had talked for a long time after finding them dead, and had chosen him to be the new chronicler. His first assignment was to travel to New Atero and speak with a Toa of Sonics named Krakua, one of the few Toa who weren't completely involved in the construction of the new cities and leading them, since sonic powers weren't very useful in such things. He had decided to bring his fellow Matoran, Damak and Midak, along. Midak seemed to love the sandy terrain, but Akamu's eyes hurt, and he was about to die from the heat. He pulled off his Kanoe Rao and shook it, and a 1/4 pound of sand fell from it. He put it back on and glanced back at the 3 Usul crabs. 2 were colored blue, a very common color, but he had been given a special orange one, a very rare color for the species. He crawled under the tent that Damak had set up, and he began scribbling on a tablet, mentioning the harsh conditions. Midak was still sitting on the back of his Usul crab Puku, who was scurrying back and forth, not in the least bit tired. Midak exclaimed in an exasperated tone, "Come on, guys, we took a break only 5 minutes ago!" Damak glared at the unusually energetic Matoran and said, "You mean 5 hours ago?" Akamu stood up and said, "No, he's right." Damak's eyes widened and he looked at Akamu. "Have you got sunstroke? It was at least 5 hours ago." Akamu corrected himself. "No, I mean he's right that we should get going. It's going to get dark soon, and we don't want to be out here tonight, especially with Dume's murderer on the loose." Damak nodded and shuddered, and then began packing up the tent. Akamu hopped up on the orange Usul crab, who he had settled upon naming Peachy because of her sandy color scheme. Damek threw the pack tent over the back of his own Usul, and the three of them set off again. To be continued.